Well, he is safe. I mean, we're talking Walt Gill here. What are we going to find? It's embarrassing. Except for our lapse in vocabulary. Change in status. Walt can't use the R word. We think he's retiring, though. We like to send him off as well as we can. And we'll tell a few stories. We were able to find, some things that we thought might amuse you and might amuse Walt. We've sat Walt here with a microphone in front of him in case he wants to comment on any of this as we're talking about it. The truth is, I met Walt about 11 years ago when we were founding N.E.T. We actually did start sitting across the dining room table. We actually did live from hand to mouth as a company for a while, if you can imagine that. We actually were a little bit crazy, I think, starting back then. Maybe the only undignified spot in his background. We had to convince the venture capitalists to actually fund this company. And they sent the executive team at the time that wasn't so busy on a field trip to go find some customers and to give some testimonials. Would they buy a product like this if, in fact, we could build it? Well, it turns out that Walt and Audrey and Bruce Smith were going to go off to the East Coast and do this. And what had happened was Bruce hurt his foot, and Audrey was pregnant. There were the three of them. They had the amount of luggage for 3 people, but only one person who could carry the bags, so to speak. So I think Walt won't mind demonstrating here, so we have some bags. Exactly how this took place. We want to see if he can still do it.
But they aren't all garment bags. I can carry 3 garment bags at once, but I don't know about these. All right, Robbie.
That's one.
Let's see, how do we do this?
That's it. That is it. Well, those of you who know Walt know he's run engineering, he's been involved in sales, he's been involved in marketing. Not only did he carry the luggage, he carried the company many times. And I think there are people who have seen enough of this who would like to come up and maybe tell their stories, get a little audience participation going on here. And I think that you'll find that we can't embarrass them, that there were no real undignified moments, although before the end of this session there might be. I think the theme you'll find is that Walt's leaving N.E.T. with a lot of respect, a lot of admiration, a lot of affection. I'd like to invite people up now to help everyone, some of the new folks that have just started recently, some who have been here for a few years, and some have been here since near the beginning. Maybe by the end of this, you'll know Walt and the company a little bit better.
On the East Coast, in the early days of N.E.T., there was if an account rep had a competitive situation, they wanted to slam dunk an account, they brought Jack Malone, Walt Gill, and Bob Fish into the account. And after a particularly successful meeting, they decided to go out and have dinner one night at a seafood restaurant. So Bob calls up and makes reservations for 3. At the end, they ask him for his Mr. Fish, and he hangs up on him. So he calls back in a little bit later and says, "No, this is real. My name is Mr. Fish." Of course, they didn't believe him, so they hung up. They decided, well, maybe someone else should try to make the reservation. So Walt calls up, makes the reservation, and says, "This is Mr. Gill," of which he immediately gets hung up on. Needless to say, they let Jack Malone make the reservation.
It was either that or eat steak.
In those early days, we had teams that went out, and Walt and Audrey were often called out together. They earned the nickname of credibility and charisma. And I'll never forget it when Walt said, "Well, which one am I?" Woody?
Thanks, Robbie. My story goes back several years ago when we were working a big carrier out of IBM. This is before N.E.T. acknowledged that we were in the carrier business. And there was suddenly this big strategic executive powwow. We had to send absolutely our best statesmen to go represent N.E.T. And the meeting was going to be in the UK. And so I approached Walt with this opportunity. It was fairly short notice. And he said, well, you realize I'm going to be in Europe the week before this, and I'm going to be in Tokyo like the day before the meeting you want me to be at. I said, absolutely. I've talked to Carol, and we have concluded that the layover is just long enough to pick up clean white shirts, and you can, in fact, get there, and you may even have time to have breakfast before the meeting. And, you know, Walt's the kind of guy that wouldn't do something stupid like that. However, the meeting went off extremely well. The result of that was the Concordia network, which we won originally through IBM, is now managed by a sales team of N.E.T. people all around the world, and is really the flagship account of our carrier strategy. So thanks for making the call. It went something like that.
Yeah, it was. It was short notice.
Walt, I'm actually glad to see you retire. I'm really getting a little tired of this cool, calm, and collected demeanor in the face of adversity. An example was a time last year when Walt and I were at the Morgan Stanley conference in Phoenix, and Walt was about to speak in front of about 150 people. And we're out there sitting in the audience waiting for our turn, and it was about 15 minutes left to go, and I noticed that this was one of those rear projection screens. The slides we had in were all backwards. So I mentioned to Walt that we had a slight problem, and I was glad that he's presenting because the slides that we have are all backwards. And of course, he just sat there in his calm, cool way, while I went flying out of the room. Well, I finally got all the slides back in the right order again. Came back in the room. We have 2 minutes to go, and Walt's sitting in the back of the room with a cup of hot water, dipping his tea bag. So I'm glad to see you retire, Walt, because you deserve it, and you're a Superman.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Not only is Walt a Superman, but there were occasional sales expeditions where a team of technical people had to go out. So we would get calls from the East Coast, usually from New York, and they would request Batman and Robin. So Walt and I would go out. Didn't have to ask who was who.
Thank you. Well, it is really difficult to find things to embarrass Walt, as everybody's already said. And now that I see his family's here, I can't talk about what happened to their pet under the garage door. So I won't mention that. I would like to mention a little fishing trip we had. Now, part of the problem is a lot of time has passed, and I've been to too many customer meetings, so I've forgotten half of this stuff, okay? But I do remember going to Half Moon Bay with a bunch of N.E.Ters to get on a fishing boat for our annual one-time-only fishing trip. And the only problem with that is the last one on the boat, and the skipper says to the first mate, "This is really stupid," which I thought was noteworthy. It was a terrible trip. I'm not even sure Walt was there. If he was the only one not throwing up. But Walt's managed to hold up under pressure, even under adversity of the sea. And lastly, I'd just like to wish Walt really well, because he's been a really special person to lean on. And Walt, I'm sorry about the wine glass I stole from your party when you invited me out.
Is Tony Tran around? Tony is one of the old-time N.E.Ters. Tony, what's your employee number? 38. Tony's been with us for about 10 years.
Thanks, Robbie. When Carol asked me to share my thought on Walt, I forgot about what I got myself into. Speaking in front of a group like this, as the first time of my life. I am so nervous that my legs are shaking. When Elvis Presley was first on stage, he was also nervous. His leg was shaking even more than